Alright everyone, it's time to talk about health and virology, the eugenics movement, the Nazis, and more. We're going to talk about AIDS. We're going to talk about COVID, monkeypox, Lyme disease, alpha-gal, and things like that. I am of the belief that these things have been deliberately engineered. Now, this doesn't mean that everything was grown in a lab, but it means that something was at least extracted from nature, identified as potentially useful for a eugenic purpose, and then was released onto the public. For instance, alpha-gal. It forces you not to eat red meat. Well, that was a eugenic value now, wasn't it? The idea that people should be vegetarians was actually near and dear. In fact, Hitler was mostly a vegetarian. Yeah, Hitler didn't eat meat, therefore you should have a steak. I'm semi-joking here, but bear with me. Alpha-gal, I believe, was, for example, engineered. It was then injected into tick populations, and it's used to, basically prevent people from eating meat, quite literally. That's literally what it does. Lyme disease. Lyme disease is a crippling disorder. I believe that that was the result of a weapons test. I believe that they were trying to test some sort of bioweapon, and then it managed to escape the lab. We'll get into COVID in a moment. That's, again, a lab release sort of situation. They were trying to test it and use it as a weapon. Then it got loose. Now it's all over the place. People get Lyme disease all the time. With regards to COVID, that, I believe, was a lab release as well. I think it was actually an accident. I don't think it was released on purpose. I literally believe in the Chang the janitor theory, which is, hey, dispose of these bats. Well, no, bats are tasty. Why don't they just sell them to the wet market? That, I think, is probably what happened in that particular case, but I think that lab research was definitely involved. We know that. And I think that weapons research was involved as well. We can insinuate that. We can deduce that that's probably what happened. With regards to monkeypox, don't you find it a little bit odd that monkeypox just magically arrives in the human population after being very, very absent, for the most part, for decades that we knew that it existed at all? Originally, the occasional tribesman would get monkeypox, probably from fucking a monkey or something like that. All of a sudden, there are tens of thousands of cases. By the way, it was a little bit odd how so many children came down with monkeypox, considering it's usually a sexually transmitted disease. Just saying, it's a little bit odd. What about AIDS? AIDS supposedly starts with patient 0 in the 1950s. But we don't really have any identifiable cases until the 1980s. Why is it that so many pandemic diseases that specifically target the reproductive system, homosexuals as well, and people who are sickly, very eugenic, why is it that so many of them start showing up after World War II? Why is it that most of these diseases were not known to people before then? Nobody knew what they were. They hadn't quantified them because they didn't exist at all in the human population. All of a sudden they start showing up over and over again. I find this a little bit beyond coincidence. I find this a little bit odd. I think that the fact that they all arrive thereafter is odd. I think, and the cat's farting, so, kitty, can you not, please? Ugh. But I think that the fact that all of these diseases come after World War II is a little bit mysterious. Before World War II, what are you dealing with? You've got tuberculosis. That's a big problem. You've certainly got polio, and we staved them off pretty successfully. Then, you've, of course, got nutritional deficiencies and certain other problems endemic to society. Smallpox, that got eradicated. Polio has been mostly eradicated. They should just drop the hammer on it and get rid of it altogether, but they keep it around as a sort of sad joke, I suppose. And tuberculosis is staved off mainly by the fact that the average person has proper nutrition now. But all of these other epidemic viruses, they all seem to follow a very common theme. They fall in line with eugenics, which, by the way, was invented originally at UVM in my own home state of Vermont. I actually attended. I've been in the building where eugenics was originally built. Originally, it was a positive movement. It was to try to get people that are healthy to breed more. It led to a Volkish movement over in Europe, of course, where people were working out, they were breeding more and so forth, but quickly it became not the greatest thing in the world. Originally it was positive. It was, hey, you're pretty, you should have another kid. Hey, you're strong, you should have another kid, and stuff like that. Hey, you're strong, you should work out more. But then it became, hey, that other person over there is not so strong. Maybe they should die. Maybe they should be removed from the reproductive field in some sense. They continued this in Vermont into the 1970s. There were cases as late as 1974 where people of so-called native ancestry were having their tubes tied or getting, involuntary vasectomies and shit like that, in order to prevent them from reproducing. Although I do not like my wah-wah-wah Native American movement sort of stuff, I don't think that people should be involuntarily sterilized without their consent. I don't believe in that. I'm not a eugenicist, not in that sense. The positivistic side made sense. This person is very healthy, they're strong, and so you want them to have kids, effectively. But then it quickly turned into that other person's not so strong, they're not so able, so we want to sterilize them. That's unfortunate now, isn't it? Also, the abortion movement begins with that, with Margaret Sanger and certain other people. The abortion movement originally was to prevent the Untermensch from breeding at all. The idea was, in extrapolation, eventually, that if somebody was economically disadvantaged, it was through their own fault, and therefore they shouldn't have kids either. They're a burden on society. Clearly, they cannot have healthy children. That was basically the point in the end zone, so to speak, with eugenics. So again, that quickly turned sour. Very, very sad. As far as these diseases go, though, I have a feeling that they were developed by Nazis. I believe that Lyme disease was developed by fucking Nazis. Look up Operation Paperclip. Yes, I believe that alpha-gal syndrome, which prevents you from eating red meat, probably was related to the same research. Yeah, and COVID, of course. They just outsourced that one to China. And so on forth. AIDS and monkeypox, and they call it mpox now, but that's just politesse. All of these things, I believe, were effectively invented by people that are attachés to the Nazi movement more than anything else. They're literal fascists. Not the fake kind, the real kind. That's about all. Peace out.